Hello, beautiful people of Vancouver, Vancouver Humane Society supporters. My name is Anna Pippus. I am a local lawyer. I live here in beautiful East Vancouver, and my friends at Vancouver Humane Society asked me to go on Facebook Live and answer some questions about animal farming. So I have a list of questions that people have sent in, and I'm going to go through those. But first, I'm going to slowly introduce myself to give people a few seconds to join in. So, like I said, my name is Anna Pippus, and for the last decade or so, I have been using my legal training to help animals on farms. Over the years, I have worked for a number of different organizations, actually including Vancouver Humane Society, with some of their plant-based programming. For several years, I worked with Mercy for Animals in Canada, working on undercover investigations, specifically doing legal advocacy, so to help bring evidence of animal cruelty on farms to law enforcement and try to advocate for charges to be filed. In more recent years, I've been working with Animal Justice, which is a Canadian organization that focuses on changing the legal situation for animals in Canada. And for them, I was focusing on farmed animal work. So everything from, similarly to what I was doing at Mercy for Animals, filing complaints of animal cruelty when evidence of farm animal mistreatment came forward, pushing for different changes and standards to the legal system, and also just working on different routes to bring attention to what's happening to animals and to try to move forward the public conversation. So sometimes that involved filing false advertising complaints against companies that were misrepresenting how they were treating animals. Hi, Nadine, and hi, Emily. Thank you for joining in and for commenting. All right, so I think that's given everybody enough time to join in. This conversation will be saved as well for later. I'm going to start with, I think initially this conversation came about, Emily Pickett at VHS suggested that we talk about the recent investigation at a pig farm in Abbotsford, Excelsior Pork, which is owned by an industry leader, one of the people who sits on the board of BC Pork. And so this has been in the news a lot. Anybody local probably is familiar with this case. So just for anybody who may not be familiar, or just to introduce the topic, what happened was some footage surfaced that was published by PETA, but taken anonymously, of animals at the pig farm, Excelsior Hog Farms. And what it showed was sort of two sets of problems. And I always think about farmed animal cruelty in two different ways. One of the sets of problems was the institutional animal cruelty. This is the cruelty that everybody knows about. It's industry sanctioned, government sanctioned. The information is available to the public. So these are things like the intense confinement, the lack of access to the outdoors, the separation of family. These kinds of problems are industry standard, but some people, myself included, think that this type of treatment of animals inherently constitutes a form of animal cruelty that the law just simply doesn't recognize yet. The other type of cruelty that we saw, the other types of problems that we saw in this footage were some treatment that may have run afoul of the industry standards. So for example, there were animals in advanced states of decomposition who were dead and whose bodies were decomposing, which suggests that the animals weren't being checked on. The industry's code of practice requires animals to be checked on a regular basis, on a daily basis, but a rotting corpse indicates that this was not happening. And there were also injuries, very large growths and some lameness. And so we don't know too much. Generally speaking, the public doesn't know too much more about it, but I think what a lot of people see is a situation that feels very troubling. So following that, some activists went to the hog farm and staged a demonstration, went inside in violation of trespassing laws because animal farms are on private property, and performed a sit-in, essentially said, we're not leaving until you allow the media to come in and to see for themselves what's really going on here. And so this has generated a really big conversation about how animals are being treated right here in our own backyard. And today, some news that has come out is that the BC SPCA will not be proceeding with a prosecution. So let me just say a few words about that, some things that there may be some questions around, and definitely feel free to ask any questions if I don't answer them. But so the SPCA, which is the law enforcement agency for animal cruelty laws in this province, had said that they won't be prosecuting. But crucially, that does not mean that there is no case or that there are no problems. What it means is that they are not able to build a legal case that will meet their prosecutorial threshold. In order to prosecute a case of animal cruelty, you need two things. You need a reasonable prospect of conviction, and you need the prosecution to be in the public interest. Now, additionally, in this case, the SPCA has said that the person who took the footage has not yet come forward. This is important because in a court of law, you can't introduce evidence that doesn't have a person to what's called authenticate it. That somebody needs to get up and under oath say, yes, I took this footage. Yes, it was at this location. Yes, it was at this time. Anonymous footage is not admissible in a court. And so therefore the SPCA can't make a case using that footage because there's nobody there to say, yes, this footage is at this place. Now, my understanding from having spoken to the people who took this footage is that this case is not over, that there is more to come, potentially more revelations, more footage, more people willing to come forward and put their names to it. So at this time, I would say that it is not case closed, and that I do hope that there will be more information brought to light and justice for the animals. Now, moving on from that particular topic and just talking in general now about the legal standards that I mentioned in passing before, which Emily Pickett from BHS wanted me to talk about. So I think this is a somewhat important, somewhat confusing topic that I think it can be useful for animal advocates to know about, is that farms in Canada are not regulated by the government. Animal welfare on farms is not regulated by the government. Animal welfare in transport and in slaughterhouses is regulated by the federal government, but there are no government standards that apply to animal welfare on farms. Instead, what we have are codes of practice. These are published by the National Farm Animal Care Council, NFAC, and you can go to their website for yourself to see what the NFAC is, who comprises it. It's mostly industry associations. And you can see the codes of practice for yourself. They're all available on the website, and they tell you how animals are going to be treated. I think at first glance, they can look pretty good to somebody who might not know about it, but when you dive into them, you see that they permit things that I think people can find very troubling, such as mutilations without painkillers, intensive confinement without any stimulation, and on and on. Really, there's a lot in there that feels very troubling to people who care about animals, I think. So the codes of practice in some provinces, and I'm just going to talk about this, I think, somewhat briefly, but it's something that if you want more information on, I think you can reach out to Vancouver Humane Society or to me to talk more about what this means. But I'm just going to talk about it quickly and then move on to some of the other questions that are more related to plant-based eating and animal farming. So the codes of practice are referred to in some provinces' animal welfare statutes. So most animal welfare legislation is provincial in this country, and some of the provinces refer to the codes of practice. There has been some push from animal advocates to refer to the codes of practice in the legislation from across the country. My position and the official position of Animal Justice, and I believe the official position of the Vancouver Humane Society, is that the codes of practice, because they are created by industry and essentially for industry, should not be the tool that animal advocates are advocating for as being the standards that apply to farm animals. And that's because if we say we want the codes of practice to be the law, then we're essentially saying the industry can create its own laws and regulate itself. Whereas instead, I think what we want as best practices is for the government to regulate animal welfare on farms. I think many people are surprised when they learn that the government is not regulating animal welfare on farms. And I think that just in general, if it's a problem that we take seriously, the treatment of farmed animals, then it's something that should be done by government. For one thing, it makes it subject to the democratic process. It also creates transparency. When the government does things, all of the documents are many of the documents are subject to freedom of information legislation, whereas when the industry does something, such as NFAC, the public has no right to access any information about what they're doing, how they're enforcing their standards, if at all. So who's being prosecuted and for what. So we don't have any way of accessing this information. So I think as best practices, the government should be creating its own independent animal welfare standards and enforcing them. So another problem with the codes of practice is that they're not really enforced in a meaningful way. Now, some farmers will say, well, yes, we have these commodity associations, the marketing associations like BC Pork do come to the farms and look for compliance with the codes of practice. But from what we've seen, these can be really cursory reviews, and there's an interest in the industry in protecting itself. And furthermore, the public has no way or no right to access any of that information. So I think that what happens is some animal advocates want to advocate for the codes of practice to form part of the law because it's a strategy. It's a strategy of something is better than nothing, and I understand that. And I think it definitely comes from the right place, a place that I share, and that place is some protections are better than no protections. But I think we run the risk of really further entrenching the industry being self-regulatory, and that is not what we want. So my position is the codes of practice are the industry. They should not form part of the law. The government should regulate animal farming. Okay, I hope that wasn't too terribly boring or technical, but moving on, let's address some of the questions that came in. Okay, Nadine, how can we bring up animal welfare issues and fight for better treatment that doesn't deflect from our goal of total animal liberation? This is a two-part question. Okay, I'll address the first part here. How can we bring up animal welfare issues and fight for better treatment that doesn't deflect from our goal of total animal liberation? So I think this is sort of getting at, in general, the so-called debate between animal welfare and animal rights. I think there's some discussion saying, well, if we advocate for better treatment of animals, we're confusing the message, we're selling out the animals. Really what we should be saying is that animals should be freed from farms, should be freed from any exploitation at human hands. And I think yes, I think there are some complications when it comes to advocating for legal change for animals. That said, I think that the way that social change takes place is inch by inch, and we need to be willing to take steps on our path towards the goal that we are trying to reach. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that every single step is on the path. So I do think we need to be mindful and reflective of whether the compromising steps that we're taking are getting us further towards our goal of animal liberation. And may I just please encourage everyone that as we're trying to figure out what those steps are, that we be kind to one another and recognize that people are doing their best. We're confronted with a tremendous situation of animal cruelty, and it can be very traumatizing for people who are empathetic to animals. And I think it really only compounds matters when we get at each other's throats about what the best strategies are. By all means, have healthy debates about tactics and strategies, but do it from a place of love and productive, constructive, yes, trying to work together rather than an insistence on being right or on changing other people. I think most of us can keep ourselves pretty busy by putting our heads down and working really hard. That'll, instead of maybe making an entire career out of putting down others for the good work that they're doing from a place of good intentions. All right, so I'll hop off my soapbox and hop onto a different soapbox. So I don't know if I really fully answered that question. So let me just say, how can we bring up animal welfare issues and fight for better treatment? Know what your goals are. So I think we probably all have some similar goals, but essentially if our goals are, if we know that animal farming isn't working, or that fur farms are incredibly cruel, or that animals don't belong in tanks at marine parks, then I think we can fight for those goals. Generally speaking, I think that laws that seek to ban something rather than regulate something are better. For example, we would want to say, a ban on whales and dolphins in captivity versus let's provide, let's create standards around the size of the tank or something like that. So I generally think these kinds of bans are better, but that said, sometimes regulating something creates more transparency or creates a public conversation, because every step of the way that you're seeking to regulate something can generate a news story, can generate a conversation, can generate an opportunity to point out what's happening, what the problems are. So I think it's very, very complicated. It's situation specific and it's advocate specific. But yes, generally push for bans and or push for example, exposing false advertising or incorrect statements or exposure. So anything that maybe doesn't necessarily have a specific legal change, but that is, you can use the laws in ways that say, this company, like this egg packaging depicts rolling pasture, when really these hens spend their entire lives in battery cages. You can contact any number of regulators and say, this is false advertising, this should not be permitted. And similarly, I think that anything that brings attention to the plight of animals helps further that public conversation. And we can work with law enforcement to try to get charges filed in furtherance of bringing more sort of moral attention to, yes, people should be held accountable for harming animals, but also just to further the conversation. These are the types of things that are happening. And when, like it happened in the news today, the charges don't go forward, this generates a news story and a conversation about why this is happening. Okay, what can we do to ensure Bill S203 passes other than contacting MPs? Contacting MPs is really critical. This bill is looking very promising. Thanks in large part to the mobilization of large numbers of people. Animal Justice has been working on this issue, so sign up for the Animal Justice mailing list if you'd like to be kept up to date on opportunities to be active. Humane Canada, Vancouver Humane Society, lots of different organizations have been behind this bill and are doing important work on it. But essentially at this point, the political process can be like a tantruming toddler and can be a little bit outside of our control. But generally speaking, the way that laws get passed is politicians hear from members of the public who say, this really matters to me. I think that Animal Justice, I know, and I'm sure other organizations like I mentioned, but I do know for a fact that Animal Justice has been really monitoring it and paying close attention. And at every juncture where we have needed public mobilization, Animal Justice has been all over mobilizing people. So I would say that that's probably the best thing that can be done. Politicians need to hear from people that people are paying attention, that this is a voting issue for people, and that this is not going away. Okay. Often when advocates draw on photos or videos of animals on farms, sorry, I'm reading a question in case that wasn't obvious, we are told that it doesn't happen here. How can advocates better reflect that these conditions are everywhere? Yeah, so I've heard that many times as well, that this only happens in the United States, this is not what happens in Canada. That's not true. Animal farming in the United States is very similar to animal farming in Canada in virtually every way. It's hard to think of very many examples of how things are different. To the extent that there are differences, they're really much more at the margins. We have very large farms here. The idea of the family farm has really gone by the wayside, and you can see that for yourself on the on government websites. So the Federal Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada publishes statistics about animal farming, including farm sizes. So you can see for yourselves that the average sizes of farms, of chicken farms and egg farms, are hundreds of thousands of animals, that that we're killing hundreds of millions of animals every single year. So this, and you can also see from the slaughter reports condemnation. So these are the animals who arrive to slaughterhouses but are considered not fit for human consumption, and that's, I mean, essentially due to injury of some kind, or some sort of disease or injury of some kind. You can also see on the CFIA website, that's the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which is the enforcement agency for this ministry. You can also see prosecution bulletins. So anytime there has been some sort of punishment for violation of transport regulations or slaughter regulations, or not anytime, but often, these are published on the CFIA website. So you can see for yourself that transport violations happen routinely, and that many of our big main transporters, animal transporters here in Canada, have committed dozens of violations and appear to see them as simply a cost of doing business. In basically every sector, from almost every province now, we have had some sort of undercover footage showing what's happening to animals in farms and slaughterhouses. And people can see for themselves that both the standard institutionalized treatment of animals is what most of us would consider to be very bad, heartbreaking, and that also the sort of behavioral treatment of animals is also very bad. And the behavior of worker towards animals is something that we can see in employment-based investigations. So this is where somebody goes, gets a job, and then wears a hidden camera to work, to their place of employment, to document what's taking place. Now that's a different kind of thing than we're going to see in one of these break and enter type of situations where people will go in and maybe document, horrific injury or something like that, but not actually see the way that the workers are treating animals. And from what I've seen as somebody who has looked at and watched the footage from every single investigation that has happened in Canada that has been published or that I've been working on as an employee of the animal rights organization, is that in every case, the workers are exhibiting callous behavior towards animals. That's not because the workers are bad people, but that's because the industry is set up in such a way that they're dealing with a large number of animals. And when the workers are there, it's because they are handling the animals or moving the animals in some way. And the animals don't want to be moved. They're fearful of humans who they haven't spent much time with, and they don't want to be moved because they're scared. They're fighting for their lives. The workers, for their part, are frustrated. They're not great jobs, or they're young and they're irresponsible in the case of some of the stuff that we've seen from the chicken catching. And they do terrible things to animals. I think what can happen is the public sees it and thinks, like these monster, like this is just a one-off, and the industry says does not represent our industry. But from what I've seen, these types of behavioral problems really are common, and it makes sense if you understand the institutional incentives that I mean, these are not pets, right? These are not beloved companion animals. These animals are commodities being moved through the system. And the way that the workers cope with this job is to not see them as sentient individuals and to not register their suffering. That is the way that the job becomes endurable. Pardon me. So how can we say that these conditions are everywhere? Well, you can just say everything that I just said. You can point to the undercover investigations videos on Mercy for Animals website. You can go to animalcharter.ca, which is a website of animal justice, which has a bit of a summary and an overview of animal farming in Canada. You can go to meatvideo.ca, which is a website created by Mercy for Animals that has like a summary of some of the footage in Canada. You can direct people to the federal government website, which talks about some of the condemnations and the prosecutions. You can direct them to news stories. So I think there's lots of different ways. Or you can simply show them something like a documentary like Dominion or Earthlings and explain to them this happens everywhere. This is animal farming and not a different country's animal farming, but Canada's as well. I think it really depends on the person and how much convincing they need, but the information is out there if only people have the open heart and the open mind to look. I think sometimes when people say that doesn't happen here, it's a defense mechanism and not really a genuine misunderstanding of the facts. Okay, what documents should advocates cite when it comes to farm cruelty in Canada? Where can we find info about inspections? I just answered that, so I won't repeat myself. Is it possible to advocate for veganism while accepting a plurality of values? I think so. I certainly advocate for veganism while accepting a plurality of values. I'm not sure what the question asker had in mind when asking this, but let me just provide my brief perspective on it. Yes, we live in a multicultural society with a plurality of values. I think for some people who live in subsistence cultures, eating and using animals is going to be a way of life. And I think that is a very different thing than somebody like me who lives in an urban area and has access to literally dozens of markets where I can access a wide variety of healthy, plant-based, sustainable foods like lentils and beans and tofu and hummus and vegetables, fruit, bread, whole grains, quinoa. So a lot of you know, if we didn't have access to such a wide variety of things, then our situation would look very different. But in the world as it is, people live in different environments, in different cultures, and yes, there are going to be people whose lifestyles are going to look different. But you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be different values. I think the value of being kind, being compassionate, and treating others the way that we want to be treated, living responsibly, I think these are all values that that we can share, even if we exhibit them in different ways or practice them in different ways. And when it comes to people who have the access that I spoke of and choose not to be vegan, I think it's you know, I think that can be challenging, and I've spent years, my career, trying to understand and work with this this reality. And I think that we need to understand that people go at their own pace. People have different priorities and different values, and we can't know where somebody else is truly at. And although I think it's healthy, good to unapologetically advocate for animals and to put our flag in the ground and to say, you know, I can't in good conscience support this industry. I choose to boycott it. I can't have animal products in my house in good conscience. I can't sit at a table where animal products are being consumed in good conscience. I think it's perfectly acceptable to live our lives in a way that feels good and right to us, while at the same time recognizing that other people are coming from a different place, and that we need to sometimes share a table with them, share a culture with them, share a family with them. And that not only the most strategic, but probably, how shall I say, but probably the best thing to do, just from a sort of a morality point of view, without saying that I have the answers on morality, is that we should still be kind to others and to understand that they are doing the best they can given their current life situation, and that the best thing we can do is to focus on ourselves. And veganism, by the way, is not the end of the journey towards being a better person. It's I think, an important step. It has been an important step for me, but being a good person is about so much more than veganism. And if we busy ourselves by trying to be the best person we can be by being vegan, but also by being kind and compassionate and understanding, you know, not only do I think that's the right thing to do, but I think it's just good advocacy. If people get the sense from us that we're judging them and being impatient with them, and that we don't understand where they're coming from, I don't know if they're going to receive the message as well as if we say, look, this is really important to me. I think what's happening to animals is wrong. I don't think we should be supporting this, but I love you and I want to make this relationship work. And so how can we do that? So I think we can both have integrity in our own values and also respect other people whose values look and feel different to ours. And look, I mean, we have all experienced, and well, anyone who's vegan but wasn't from birth has all experienced a values shift. So we know that values shifts can happen. We don't know when we're going to have another values shift, and we don't know when somebody else is going to have a values shift. So I think just probably the most responsible course of action is humility. We don't know everything, and we never will. And that's what makes life beautiful. Okay, what made me go vegan? What made me go vegan was the animals. I went vegetarian as a kid because I loved animals. I didn't want to eat them, and so I didn't. And fast forward to when I was a little bit older and old enough to learn more about farming, and I was looking at how I could source ethical eggs and dairy, and I realized I couldn't. There's no such thing. So I didn't. So I went vegan. What really, I was sort of working on becoming vegan for a few years, but what really put me over the edge and really woke me up and felt like a monumental shift for me was reading the story in a book called Blood Relations by Charlotte Montgomery, which I think is out of print, but I'll lend it to you if you want to read it. I read a story in that book about a bull, a downed bull who had just arrived at a slaughterhouse with shattered hips and was not able to walk. But the workers needed to get him off the truck and into the slaughterhouse. And so they used an electric prod to force this bull who couldn't walk to drag himself to the end of the truck. And then he slammed down onto the ground below, and then again, slowly, through force of the workers, forced himself into the slaughterhouse, where by this time the slaughter day was over, and so the bull was left on the floor for the next day, alive, because animals who are not alive can't be killed for meat. Now, they're also supposed to be able to walk, and they're supposed to be in good health, but you know, there's problems with the industry. Anyways, I found it very heartbreaking. It stayed with me, and it really made an impact on me. But more than that, it just occurred to me that when we use animals for profit, we will treat them like commodities, and that's just the way that's just how incentives work. I've studied economics. I understand that. I could see where the incentives were going here, and not because the workers were bad people. They just wanted to go home to their families from this crappy job that they don't want to be at either. And you know, it's just that when we're not living in harmony with our environments, and with, maybe once upon a time people were living with animals and there was more of a symbiotic relationship, or people who live in a subsistence way can respect and thank the animal for giving its life, as they say. That is totally a different kind of thing than going to the supermarket and buying an animal that has been grown in the equivalent of a monocrop by workers who are paid minimum wage. And in many cases are vulnerable and marginalized workers themselves. So the system that we have set up is set up to where animal suffering, we should expect it. It should be the norm. I would be surprised if there weren't animal suffering in the system that we've set up. So that's why I went vegan. Okay, I've got one last question here. What differentiates the broad animal movement from human-oriented movements for justice, and what can we do to be taken more seriously? I don't know if there is much that differentiates them. I see a lot of commonality actually with other movements for justice. They tend to be focused on raising the standing of a class, a member of society, of widening our community to include some class of individuals that we have otherized. And it includes fighting for justice, but also coming from a place of empathy, of using our empathy to realize this is wrong. And I think in all social justice movements, it has come from a place of people stumbling upon a truth, something that we know to be true. We know it's wrong to do this to animals. This is, you can argue this six ways from Sunday, but the reality is we just know. We can take one look at this and we can think, this does not sit well with me, this is wrong. And I think when enough people start to understand that and develop that sense of empathy for how these other individuals, then social movements progress. And we're starting to get closer and closer to reaching a critical mass with animal issues. What can we do to be taken more seriously? Be serious. I don't know if we have a problem with the animal movement not being taken seriously. I mean, without hearing from the questioner about maybe some examples. Just in general, I don't think we have a lack of seriousness. I think people really love animals, actually. We have a complicated relationship with animals. Many households have pets. More than half of households have pets in Canada. And we love our animals. We spend millions, billions of dollars on gifts for our animals and on food and doggy daycare and all kinds of things. I mean, the concept that animals deserve love and compassion and justice is not lost on us. So I think what any movement can do to be taken more seriously is to convey the gravity and the seriousness of the situation. So I hope that's not too flippant, but I really mean it. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll up and make sure I didn't miss any questions here. Oh, how do we comment? So many new meat and dairy alternatives. Are we seeing a decrease in farms and meat dairy consumption? Where can we find the stats? Sylvia, yes, there are so many meat and dairy alternatives. There are I think anyone who's been not living under a rock has seen that the plant-based food movement has been exploding, and polls continue to come out to show that more and more Canadians are eating less meat, want to eat less meat, are vegan, are vegetarian, and so it seems that the numbers on this are growing. At the same time, we are seeing, generally speaking, over the past few decades, we're seeing a consolidation of farms. So we are seeing fewer farms, but they're bigger farms, and same thing with slaughterhouses. We are seeing an increase in the number of animals being killed, though. Not But I would say not because people are not interested in eating less meat, but for probably two reasons. One is the population of Canada is growing year over year, so more animals are being killed. And two, there is a big movement towards people replacing red meat with non-red meat. So people are eating chickens instead of cows, beef. And cows being much bigger animals, you're going to have to kill way more chickens in order to replace that cow. So we are seeing an increase in the number of animals killed. Sadly, that information is available on Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada website. You can run any number of reports to see how many animals are being killed. But you can also access it on the Animal Justice website. Every year we've done a blog post running the numbers and adding them all up, so you can see that. But I think that increasingly the movement towards, oh, and let me just say, I think that where this fits in is that at the end of the day, we can regulate farms, but there's always going to be, like I said about why I went vegan, there's always going to be some problems. It's always going to be an exploitable system, and ultimately, I just think about it like the golden rule: treat others the way that I want to be treated. I do not want to be separated from my family and sent to slaughter and killed and eaten. I don't want that to happen to me, and so I don't do it to somebody else when I have access to alternatives. It's really very simple for me. So yes, I think that answered that question. Okay. I also think maybe I just lost my train of thought, so sorry if I just stopped talking midway through that thought. Oh, this is making me cry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think I'm so used to it that yes, it's heartbreaking. It's terrible. How should animal advocates determine their vote in the upcoming federal election? That's a great idea. If you have the capacity to get politically involved, I think it's a great idea if you can go to a town hall and ask everyone who's running in your area what their position is on animal issues. It's a good way of forcing them to answer that in a public way, and for them to know that this is something that they're going to be asked about, that they have to have a position on. Otherwise, Animal Justice has Humane Voters. The website is humanevoters.ca. So they've done work not in every election, but I think in the Ontario provincial election and in federal elections, asking candidates what their position is on elections and following up with them. And similarly, Vancouver Humane Society has done that with municipal elections. So yes, always get in touch with your MPs. Have them on the equivalent of speed dial for email. Whenever there's an issue that comes up, email them. Say, did you hear about this new report that says that the climate change is worse than we thought and that we need to eat less meat? Or what's your position on Bill S-203 or whatever it is? Ask them questions, send them information. It's fine to email them on a regular basis. That's what they're there for. Okay. Okay, many feel that the SPCA not filing charges means nothing was done wrong by the farmer. I know, I think this is a really big problem. People are saying, you see, they didn't press charges when really it's meaningless. But yes, I think that there will be more to this case, like I said. So don't lose hope, my fellow animal advocates. So thank you so much. I hope I got everyone's questions. Thank you for those of you who have stayed till the end, and I hope this was useful or interesting. And I'll see you later. Okay, bye. End live video.